all, and welcome to week 4. This week, we are going to be talking about chronic diseases. The objectives for this week include being able to explain how public health initiatives deal with chronic illnesses. You will research and analyze a public health initiative that deals specifically with chronic health issues. And you will explain the methods available to reduce inborn and genetic diseases. The items due this week are Chapter 11 and 12 quiz. You will be analyzing a public health program. You will then share which program you've analyzed on a wiki. And of course, you have your discussion board post. I'm going to pause now to show you the Analyze a Public Health Program. As you can see, this assignment is worth 30 points. And the purpose is to describe a public health program currently in use, and then judge the impact of the program based on the program components. I've provided 3 different topics for you to choose from. You can choose to look at nutrition, physical activity, and obesity, heart disease and stroke, or diabetes. So choose one of the websites that you're interested in focusing on, and then choose one program to evaluate. Once you have chosen the program you'd like to evaluate, you will write your evaluation. As you can see here, this is a 2-page minimum, double space please, and address the questions here. So what is the big public health problem that this program addresses? The targets, which group or organization needs to change or take action to ensure progress on the public health problem? What are the outcomes? What are the activities or the components of the program? What is the program measuring to ensure it's successful? Resource and inputs is what is needed from a larger environment in order for this program to be mounted or done successfully. And then reflection is your opinion. Do you feel this program will be or is successful? Why or why not? Moving back to the PowerPoint, I just want to make one note. Next week, there is going to be a group project. So I suggest looking at the group project this week to sort of start organizing your thoughts. So next week, we're covering 5 chapters. To avoid me lecturing on 5 chapters, what I've decided to do is you will work in your discussion board group to create a PowerPoint on an assigned chapter. You will then share your PowerPoint with the class, view each other's PowerPoints, and then finally you will vote on your favorite PowerPoint, and the group that gets the highest number of points will get, or votes, will get 10 extra credit points. So there's a little motivation so that you do a good job. And so for next week, I've given you some ideas on how to make online group work. So some tips and tools to help make it a better process. And then here are the chapters. So if you're in group 1, you'll be doing chapter 15. If you're in group 2, you'll be doing chapter 16. If you're in group 3, you'll be doing chapter 17, group 4, chapter 18, and group 5, chapter 19. I would suggest that you break up the chapter and assign different roles for different members in your group. I also suggest using Google Docs to create your slides. That way everyone in your group can have access to it and edit in real time. And keep in contact with your group members. And so I am doing this PowerPoint in this presentation before groups are assigned, but I just want to show you how to utilize some of the features for your group. So when you enter the discussion board, it'll bring you to your group number. Click on your group number. And here, under group tools, are some of the tools that can help you be successful. You can send emails to your entire groups. Over here, group tasks, you can assign tasks to different group members or decide on which task each group member is going to do. Your group discussion board, of course. File exchange is where you can exchange files. However, as I said, I would recommend doing a Google Doc. And then collaborate is you can meet virtually face-to-face, to talk about the project. Under group discussion board, which I know that you're all familiar with, but for week 5, you'll see here it says PowerPoint discussion. The purpose of this area, and I would hit subscribe, is for you and your group members to engage in a conversation about how to complete this project. And then once your group is done with your PowerPoint, you're going to put it over here where it says week 5 PowerPoints. And then that's where you'll view your group's PowerPoints as well as other groups in the class to vote. All right. So that's next week. So going back to this week, we're going to be talking about biomedical basis of chronic diseases. Chronic diseases are now the leading cause of death and disability in the US, and there are multiple causes or risk factors. It generally takes a long period of time to come about. There is this idea of secondary prevention. So if you recall, primary prevention is before it's even a problem. So in preventing cardiovascular disease, perhaps the prevention is to eat a healthy diet, to exercise regularly, and so forth. Now, secondary prevention is perhaps a person is just beginning to show signs of cardiovascular disease, or it's in the early stages of cardiovascular disease. There is a possibility of now changing behaviors to reduce the possibility of it transmitting or not transmitting, of it progressing into a later stage. We look at cardiovascular disease, and it includes atherosclerosis, heart disease, and stroke. What happens is plaque begins to form in blood vessels, and in the US, it tends to be an earlier age. The American diet or typical American diet typically raises the risk for cardiovascular disease. Other risk factors are diet, having high blood pressure or hypertension, diabetes, and smoking, and all of these work together to cause injury to artery walls. When we look at the other risk factors, we have to consider total cholesterol. The lower, the better. However, your cholesterol is now reported as a ratio, and it shows LDL over HDL. LDL is low density lipoprotein, and HDL is high density lipoprotein. And for this, LDL is considered your bad cholesterol. So you want a lower number for your LDL. On the other side, HDL is considered your good cholesterol. So higher numbers of this are actually be protective factors. One way I'd like to remember it is LDL starts with L, so low, you want low numbers, and HDL starts with H, you want high numbers. In addition, genetics are a major factor in cardiovascular disease as well. Exercise lowers total cholesterol and increases your HDL, again, that good cholesterol, which is what you want. Smoking lowers your HDL. And there's this wide use of statins for secondary prevention. We look at hypertension. Hypertension is high blood pressure. It is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. And there's something called essential hypertension. There's really no known cause. Some risk factors that contribute to hypertension include obesity, smoking, and stress. There is some research to suggest the role of salt in hypertension, so too much salt and sodium can raise your blood pressure. Normal blood pressure is considered below 120/80. However, 140/90 is considered borderline high blood pressure, so at that point, the doctor may start engaging in some secondary prevention options to get your blood pressure to get lower. And secondary prevention has been shown to be pretty effective. Moving on to cancer. Cancer is not one disease, but many. And each different type of cancer has different risk factors, treatments, etc. But all of them arise from mutations in your DNA. And these mutations can be caused by chemicals, they can be caused by viruses and radiation. Diet and hormones also play a role in these mutations and the prevention of mutations. Tobacco use has been estimated to cause 1/3 of cancer deaths. And testing chemicals for carcinogenicity, which is the cancer-causing substance, is really complex and sometimes doesn't always give an adequate or accurate picture of which substances cause cancer. The next chronic disease is diabetes, which is a major cause of disability in the US. And it's basically a deficiency in the body's ability to metabolize sugar. And really there are 3 types of diabetes, but you have type 1, which is child onset, and this is a failure of insulin production. So the body was born with it or it developed a little later on, but your body does not produce insulin. Type 2 diabetes is considered adult onset, and this is insulin resistant. So the body is producing insulin, but it's not working. Type 2 diabetes is closely related with obesity and inactivity. And the prevalence in the US with type 2 diabetes is rising along with obesity. So those two are rising together, getting higher together. Type 2 is treatable and type 1 is treatable, but you need long-term monitoring, you need good access to medical care, and you need to be able to follow your treatment plan. Now, I mentioned there were 2 types of diabetes, but I said that there were actually 3 types. The third type is called gestational diabetes. Diabetes occurs while a woman is pregnant. Some of the complications for diabetes include blindness, kidney failure, poor wound healing, and amputations of the extremities, so fingers, but generally lower extremities, feet, and toes. Other chronic diseases of public health importance include Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementias, and arthritis. Moving on to chapter 12, we're going to talk about genetic diseases and other inborn errors. So environmental teratogens are those things that can mutate the cells in our body. So we have infectious pathogens that would include syphilis, rubella, toxoplasmosis. There are environmental chemicals that can alter genetics, mercury, some of the drugs, thalidomide, Accutane hormones, etc., and alcohol. Genetic diseases are where there are chromosomal abnormalities. An example would be Down syndrome. And these genetics, it could be autosomal dominant, a dominant gene, it could be a recessive gene, or it can be X-linked. And X-linked meaning it's on the X gene. Now, if you think back to health class, everybody has an X gene. Our genetics, you're either XX, meaning you're female, or you're XY, meaning you're male. But regardless of which sex you are, everybody has an X chromosome. When we look at genetic diseases, it may be caused by some sort of new mutation. And some of the severity of some of the genetic conditions may be impacted by the environment. So example, folic acid supplements can reduce the risk of certain genetic diseases. Genes influence susceptibility to other diseases of adulthood as well. So as a result, there have been increasing specificity tests for newborns or prenatal tests, so while the mother is still pregnant. They do a test drop of blood from newborns for metabolic abnormalities. All newborns in the US are screened for at least 2 conditions, PKU and hypothyroidism. Depending on where you live, some states vary in the different conditions they're screened for. Most conditions are autosomal recessive, meaning you need both parents to have a recessive gene, the gene to cause the abnormality. So even if one parent is a carrier and the other parent is not a carrier, then the genetic abnormality would not be passed down. Early diagnosis can prevent or reduce permanent damage as a result of the abnormality. And some conditions are complicated to test for. One of those conditions is called cystic fibrosis, which is also a genetic abnormality. When we look at carrier screening, so this would be screening the parents or the potential parents if you're looking to have a child. They're screening for recessive genes in high-risk populations. An example would be Tay-Sachs disease in Jews, and these were actually European Jews. This was encouraged by Jewish leaders. Sickle cell disease in African Americans. The screening program in the 1970s was really misunderstood and poorly conducted. When we look at prenatal diagnosis, there are some that are against this, and I'll tell you why. Because there are some conditions that would be diagnosed prenatally, so while the mom is pregnant, and that there's no cure for. And so really, your decision is on abortion in order to maintain a pregnancy. So for anyone who is against abortion for any reason, they feel like that's not a good test because there's really no options. Other tests, though, that done prenatally, you can look for Down syndrome, you can look for encephaly and spina bifida prenatally. Genomic medication. So there are projects to look at, can we look at altering the genes prenatally? So there is the Human Genome Project where they mapped out the human genes. There are many potential benefits, but there are also ethical dilemmas. At what point do we say that we're not going to modify genes? Are we going to modify genes for beauty, for certain characteristics, height, eye color, hair color? As you know, there have been 2 genes that have been identified with cancer. This is breast cancer, the BRCA1 and the BRCA2. So if you have those genes, then does it mean you're going to get cancer? No. It just means you have an increased risk of cancer. However, some people who have tested positive for those 2 genes have decided to get double mastectomies and have their breasts cut off as a preventative action against breast cancer, and then having targeted therapies. So there are some guidelines for genetic screening. Newborn screening only when it benefits the newborn, when it can confirm a diagnosis, and when treatment and follow-up are available for infants. So for example, what would be the purpose of testing an infant for some disease that there is no treatment or no cure for? Then it would be pointless. Carrier identification should be voluntary, confidential, and include counseling. That would be genetic counseling. Meaning, if I was doing a genetic test to see what kind of risks my children would have, they are not allowed to share that information with other people. It should be voluntary, meaning I should choose whether or not to have that genetic screening or not. And then it needs to involve some sort of counseling to help me make educated decisions on what the role of my genes would play in a pregnancy. Prenatal diagnosis should include education and counseling. All tests of high quality have to be evaluated by the FDA, which is the government oversight of laboratory proficiency. And there needs to be, in general, more education for the general public about genetics. This concludes our PowerPoint for week 4. I hope you all have a great week, and let me know if you have any questions or concerns.